Stephane Dion. Good evening. Good evening, Pierre. So in your open letter in La Presse, you raised 3 points of disagreement. I'd like you to explain them to me. One of the concerns that you have over the Quebec nation and the recognition of the Quebec nation. Now, would Quebec be the only one requesting this status? Let's start from the beginning. I'm quite comfortable saying that Quebecers are a nation. Sociologically speaking, we have several cultural features, linguistic features in common. That's fine. If we want Quebec to be recognized within Canada more than is the case currently as a province, with French as its official language, with a civil code, with 3 out of 9 Supreme Court judges, we have to know why and what we want. This is why I wrote this letter. Before we ask other Canadians to give us something more, in addition to what we already have, we have to know what we want and why we want it. But 2/3 of Quebec delegates voted in favor of this motion. It doesn't matter. I still disagree, and I'll explain why. When we ask Canadians, in addition to the recognition that you already provide us, well, before we do that, we have to know what we want and why we want it. And as I said in my letter, the answer is not immediately evident. You're saying that Newfoundlanders could perhaps demand the same thing. Or perhaps they'll say, well, you're requesting this. Well, we want to be a nation. We've already been a country. I often take part in the national festival in Acadia. Should Acadians be allowed to be a nation? How many nations do we want to include in the Constitution? That's the first question on this issue. Do you think we should tackle this issue, or do you think it's desirable to deal with it? Because you deal with that in your letter. First issue, is it necessary? Because if we don't tackle it, does this mean that Quebec has to leave Canada? So if there is refusal, this means that Quebec would have to separate. We'd have to see, but we have to know why. The third question, is this going to be symbolic? And I'm not underestimating symbols, but when something is symbolic, it's just recognizing a fact. It doesn't go any further. But will it have repercussions on privileges, on the distribution of powers and public monies? And if it does, what will they bill? Do you have a clear answer to this? Because if we don't have a clear answer to these questions, it's very difficult to ask the question of Canadians. We've already been through this experience 3 times at Lake Meech, the Charlottetown Agreement, and the Calgary Declaration. Let's talk about the Calgary Declaration a bit. I'd like you to refresh my memory a bit. It was in 1997. We often talk about Meech and Charlottetown, but we don't talk about Calgary. Well, in 1997, the premiers of all the provinces except Quebec decided to see what they could do to recognize Quebec. So they made a statement, a declaration, within which they recognized the distinct nature of Quebec, the unique nature of Quebec. It went through all the various provincial legislatures, and when it got to Quebec, the political classes in Quebec said, well, it doesn't have enough teeth. It doesn't meet our requirements. So it was rejected. So now we have a new vocabulary. There's a problem because an English nation is really an equivalent of a country. So if we ask Canadians to recognize us as a nation, well, we have to have a clearer answers. Is this just going to be purely symbolic, or will it have teeth? And is it something necessary without which we won't be able to continue to live within Canada? I don't agree with that, as you know. I think we can continue to remain within Canada without this additional recognition, and we have to ask ourselves whether we want to be the only nation to be recognized, or should other groups such as the Aboriginals or Acadians or Newfoundlanders be able to make the same request. So I think we have to answer these questions before we ask other Canadians to get into this debate with us. I'm not asking for unanimity, of course, but well, my letter was really to challenge the premise, because we have to realize that Quebecers have different opinions on this issue. Mr. Ignatieff, for him, it means that it's purely symbolic. Mr. Duceppe, in answer to this, said that this would go much further. So this isn't the first time that we've had this debate, but we're a bit more advanced now. Before we ask the other Canadians, our English Canadian friends, to get involved in this debate, we should have clear answers to the questions that I've just asked. For me, it's an interesting debate, but it's not a crucial debate to have. A crucial debate would be to realize that the planet is suffocating, and if Canadians and Quebecers don't try to find a solution, well, we're not going to be doing our duty by our children. I think we have to really get together. We have to work together to create a country that will find solutions to economic development which should be sustainable. In terms of what you said, what was said at the end of the week, you always want to come back to this issue. Well, the issues of this leadership debate, the major issue should really be on how we're going to face the major issues of our time. And the debate's being hijacked, if you like. If I understand the motion correctly, a task force will be asked to look at ways of officializing this recognition. We're talking about at the right time. Who's going to take part? Experts on the nation issue. We're getting back into the constitutional debate. In the press this morning, a journalist said you can't be against Quebec signing on to the Constitution. Quebec is part of the Constitution. The National Assembly has not recognized the Constitution that was repatriated in 1982. We shouldn't dramatize this. I don't think it's something that should lead to the breakup of Canada. In Germany, Bavaria has not yet signed on to the Constitution Act, 1989 Constitution Act. The same thing goes for Switzerland. Several cantons haven't signed on to the Swiss Constitution. It's not an ideal situation, but these things happen. We share the same constitutional rights as other Canadians. If you have a problem abroad, you only have to go to the embassy. You have the right to receive the same services as any other Canadian. The prerogatives of the province of Quebec are much larger than other provinces in certain cases. Of course, amendments in the future might be necessary, but if we start this debate in an abstract way, based on a symbolic identity issue, based on the same premise that led us to failure in 1997 and before, well, I don't think that's the important issue. I think Quebecers should work with other Canadians to make sure that we don't jeopardize our children's future.